Root. There are 23 moments in black history DeSantis wants to hide from Florida students. So let's get started. Things like this. The first photo that I'm going to show you is about the U.S. National Guard troops. They blocked off Beale Street as civil rights marchers wearing placards reading, "I am a man," passed by on March 29, 1968. It was the third consecutive march held by the group in as many days. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who had left town after the first march, would soon return and be assassinated. So let's look at this right here. This is down in Memphis. Y'all, that Florida man, also called Governor Ron DeSantis, has been endorsing bills left and right placing restrictions on what kids learn about black history. He's even gone as far as to allow the ban of an AP African American Studies course for high schoolers and approve the Department of Education's watered down curriculum on teaching slavery. Quote, instruction includes how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, read the guidelines. Let me read that again. Quote, instruction includes how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, close quote, read the guidelines. You might have said to yourself, is he serious? Oh, DeSantis is dead ass. Even after a white schooler executed a racially motivated massacre in his state, DeSantis' campaign to avoid parents experiencing white guilt continues. Hiding the truth of what this country did to black folks is going to impact hundreds of thousands of Florida students, especially black students. If any of them happen to be surfing the internet upon their own curiosity, here are 17 moments in black, American history they must know. The Birmingham Children's Crusade. See the photo? Let me make that a little bit bigger. Yeah, this actually happened. Can't whitewash this stuff. Pretend that didn't happen. It happened. In the world's first broadcast glimpse of the racist violence, black people face a peaceful protest turned into a nightmare. Over 1,000 students gathered at 6th Street Baptist Church to embark on a day of marching and sit-ins when they were met by a crowd of Birmingham police. Their way of detaining the peaceful demonstrators were releasing canines and launching water hoses at the youths. Over 2,000 kids were arrested. The images of the children being bitten and thrown against the brick walls of stores by water-prompted President John F. Kennedy to demand a solution to desegregate private and public businesses. And the second one is Loving versus Virginia. Before this case, it was illegal to marry the one you loved if they didn't have the same skin color. Why? Because the thought of black people mixing in with white people was shunned. Interracial couples were often looked down upon or attacked. So here is the interracial couple right here. Though Mildred Jenner and Richard Loving took their fight for their marriage to the courthouse, the Supreme Court ruled in 1967 that any state laws banning interracial marriage would be struck down and are unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment's equal protection and due process. Next is the St. Augustine movement. Here's another Florida fact for you. On June 18, 1964, A group of white and black protesters defied the rules of segregation and jumped into a whites only pool at the Moonson Motor Lodge in St. Augustine. To get them to leave, the white owner did more than shout and wave his finger. He poured acid into the pool. Now let's pull this photo up. One they don't want you to see. This really happened. The protests was part of the larger movement of sit-ins that were led by Martin Luther King Jr. After word of the acid incident got back to President Lyndon B. Johnson, the Civil Rights Act was approved, bringing an end to an 83-day Senate filibuster. In 1971, in one of the most infamous prisons for abusive and detriment treatment of black people, over 2,000 inmates protested the way their conditions in a violent revolt. Up to 42 guards were held hostage and the inmates took over the facility, causing a standoff. Inmates invited the presence of the news to spread the word about their demands, the removal of the superintendent, and immunity from criminal prosecution for their rebellion. So this is called the Attica Prison Riot. However, 5 days into it, the governor sent a group of state and local officers to regain control of the facility. A slew of both hostages and inmates were shot and killed. As a consequence, the prisoners were forced to strip naked, crawl through the communal outhouse, and to run down the hallways in between lines of guards who beat them and spat racial slurs. In Marion, Indiana lynching. This is the next one. In 1930, Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith were abducted from jail and lynched after being brutally beaten by an angry white mob. The two were accused of shooting and injuring a white man and then later accused of raping the man's fiancée. That claim was later recanted, but it was already too late. The mob showed up outside the local jail and demanded the two men be turned over to them eventually. Someone broke in, dragged them out, and nooses were placed on their necks. Smith was killed at the jail after being stabbed and having his arms broken. His body was hung next to Shipp as a photographer was invited to take images of the scene. Let me impose this photo here. That is fake news. And they smiled as they did it. Yeah, it was really funny. See, let's just check it out. Yeah, look how happy these folk were. Nice and happy. If this offends some of you watching Tyrone Bowman tonight, then that's the reality. You can't whitewash history. It doesn't matter if black people participated in all this mess. If they're guilty, and if they condone this kind of foolishness, I will talk about them as well. Next is the arrest of Lady Day, known as Billie Holiday, all because of a song that she wrote entitled Strange Fruit, which was a song about lynching. There's Lady Day. Holidays, listen. Let me read the lyrics to the song. The violent lynching led legendary jazz singer Billie Holiday to pen the song Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Holiday's song resulted in a warning from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics to permanently remove it from her set list as it fueled a desire for justice against racist violence. FBN Commissioner Harry Anslinger launched a campaign targeting Holiday by sending agents to her shows to make sure she didn't sing the song. She continued, risking her career and nearly her life. However, Anslinger latched onto her addiction to drugs and used that as a way to arrest her on her hospital bed. Almost every kid in school should learn about this old ass piece of paper, just as they do with the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. However, President Abraham Lincoln's executive order on January 1, 1863 proclaimed that all the enslaved individuals in the rebellious states or Confederate states that endorsed slavery were considered free. That's huge. Now, this didn't immediately go into effect. In fact, many enslaved people were hidden from the news of the proclamation by their masters. If you leave this out, the history lesson, you will never know how black people in the South became free. Speaking of fighting for freedom, the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion of Southampton, Virginia, adds some context to how slavery wasn't desirable, as Florida's curriculum wants to make it. Turner, an educated preacher, was one of the few enslaved people who dared to go against the white man and try to claim his freedom through an insurrection. Through an insurrection. That did end up in the slaughter of over 60 white folks. However, the fear of black people overpowering their masters led to a counterattack claiming the lives of innocent enslaved people. That's how bad they wanted to keep black people bound. Not to mention the state legislature responded by trying to send free black people to Africa, denied them their right to a jury trial, and passed anti-literacy laws, making it against the law to teach reading and writing to any black person freed or enslaved or potentially produce. Nat Turner, number 2. Let's talk about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. You can't talk less. This is a real photograph of Harriet Tubman here. God rest her soul. That's real. You can't talk about Harriet Tubman without acknowledging the reason we know her name. Leading people out of slavery, she wasn't nicknamed Moses for no reason. This woman single-handedly devised a plan to help up to 70 enslaved people escape captivity, including her own family, by creating an underground system of routes and places of refuge to guide them to freedom. She also served as a scout and spy for the Civil War against the Confederate forces, and was also a force in the women's suffrage movement until the day she died. It's safe to say this woman was a gangster. The discovery of HeLa cells. Lax is the reason why we have most of our vaccines and medical treatments. In 1951, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins, the only big hospital at the time that took black patients. While being treated, doctors took samples of her DNA and discovered the HeLa immortal cell line, the first cell that could duplicate itself over and over. Lakes died in the hospital the same year, and her cells grew in demand as they went into further medical research. Her family's blood samples were even collected. Her cells were used to develop everything from polio to COVID-19 vaccines. Yet her family received none of the profits, and Lax died never knowing her body was being used to change the medical field forever. Okay. Here we are. Scottsboro Boys is another topic that people don't like to talk about. So here they are right here. These are the Scottsboro Boys. On March 25, 1931, a fight broke out on a train headed to Memphis. On that train was a group of teenagers who were kicked off the car by an angry white mob. After getting off, they were immediately approached by police and told they were accused of raping 2 white women. They were rushed into trial with an all-white jury and sentenced to the death penalty, with no evidence to prove they touched those girls. Instead, a reporter found out later the 2 girls lied. The 2 girls lied. It wasn't until decades later that the men were able to fight for their freedom. Next is the lynching of Emmett Till. It's ignorant to water down the impact of racist violence, especially when it claimed the lives of innocent people like Emmett Till. He was only 14 years old visiting a family in Mississippi when he was accused of making inappropriate advances on Carolyn Bryant. She lied to her husband and his brother, claiming Till whistled at her. As a result, the two men kidnapped Till from his family's house, tortured him to death, and mutilated his body. He was unrecognizable when his body was discovered floating down the Tallahatchie River. For that reason, his mother left his body the way it was and had an open casket funeral for the world to see what white racist hate did to her boy. This is the actual photo of Emmett Till's body. We're talking about historical facts here. It was known as Bloody Sunday. 25-year-old John Lewis led a peaceful march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to advocate for black people to have the right to vote. Why couldn't they vote? Racism, however, as Lewis and the other demonstrators reached the top of the bridge. A group of state troopers were waiting for them on the other side, backed by other white spectators waving Confederate flags. The marchers ended up being accused of unlawful assembly and were ambushed with batons, clubs, and whips, just fighting for the right to cast their ballot as a black American. The violence that erupted against the peaceful protest is why this day is often remembered as, quote, Bloody Sunday, close quote. There'll be a part 2 of this video coming up. I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender, never quit.